Why do query letters exist anyway? Why can't you just send in your manuscript and let the agent read the manuscript and decide if they enjoy reading it anyway? I'm Michael Carr with Veritas Literary, and today we're going to talk a little bit about the query. I'm going to have a series of videos about how best to put your query together, how to make it hooky for the agent, what to do, what not to do. Today I'm going to start off a little bit talking about the purpose of why the query letter exists in the first place. And then we're going to talk a little bit about a couple of pitfalls. If I have enough time here, I tend to get a little long-winded on the subject, so I might split this into another video too. But one thing to keep in mind is that the query is not for you. It is for the agent, and it is a way of reducing the workload of the agent to try to help us manage what is a fairly difficult, onerous, and oftentimes not very lucrative part of our job, and that is to sift through all the hundreds, thousands of contacts that people make, people who are looking for an agent and trying to get our attention. This is a high work, low reward sort of project that nevertheless has enough little gold nuggets in there, and for many of us is a necessary part of our work, even if on a daily basis it feels a little bit like a grind. So the first thing to remember is that the query is perhaps a little bit like a book jacket for a book, as you would find as a reader going into a bookstore. So when you go into a bookstore, if you have $20 to spend and you're looking for something to read on the beach this weekend, so you have a finite amount of time and you'd like to start the book on Friday and finish on Sunday before you leave to go home, then you're going to be looking for a certain kind of a book. And a query is a little bit like that for us. It's there to help define, in the same way that a book cover does when you go into a bookstore, to help sift through really quickly the sorts of things that you might be interested in and other things you might not be interested in. So if you go into the bookstore, for example, and you walk past all of the guidebooks about Spain or Japan or India, you walk past the cozy mysteries, you walk past the memoirs, and you go over to where there are suspense thrillers, you're not actually making a value judgment about the guidebooks for India, right? You just are not going to India at this time. You aren't interested in reading about India because you're looking for a novel, something to keep your mind occupied while you're sitting there under an umbrella with a cold drink in your hand on the beach this weekend. And you've got $20. So you're looking for something in that price range. Right? You're not making a value judgment about anything else. So a lot of times when you're going to get a pass from an agent, it's going to be the same sort of thing. The agent is going to look at the query and reject a large number of those, not based on anything to do with the quality of the writing, the quality of the idea, anything like that, which is not to say those aren't big considerations, but a lot of times it's simply that what you're putting in front of them is not in sync with what they're looking for at that exact moment, right? So if you were to send me a guidebook to India, for example, I'm going to reject that. It's not that I'm disinterested in India or going to India someday, but I don't know anything about the guidebook marketplace. I don't know how to market those books. I don't have a lot of knowledge about that particular country. I'm just the wrong agent for that sort of a book. There might be another time when you go into that bookstore and you love suspense thrillers, but you just read two of them. So what you're really looking for this weekend is a light piece of chick lit that's going to just a little bit of brain candy. Is not necessarily going to be serious. You're going to just enjoy reading that and just blow through that. You're once again not making a value judgment about those suspense thrillers. Similarly, it may be that I have just taken on a new writer in epic fantasy, for example, and I'm getting ready to go out in the marketplace with that. If I see another book that's kind of operating in that same space, then I have to think about going out to a limited number of editors with a similar book that's going to be in competition with the one I've already signed at that exact moment. A book that might have been great for me 6 months ago or might be great in 6 months is just not, as I say in my query, not what I'm looking for at this time. I'm not making any sort of judgment about that. So knowing that and knowing what I'm using, that I'm using the query as a way of filtering out in that first go a large number of those sort of things, then that kind of tells you some things you shouldn't try to do, right? First, you shouldn't try to convince me that I know you don't represent this, but this is just so wonderful. You shouldn't try to get bragging or boastful about your book. You're really just trying to tell me this is the book. Uh, it's this genre, this number of words. Here's a brief little bit of the plot. Here's why I'm the one writing it, and it may be the reason you're writing it is no other than you're a novelist who you think has written a good book. But if you have some other things in there, you might put those in there too to attract my attention. There's a reason why we always say put the word query in there as query colon or query dash, and then you can say the name of the book or what genre, but important to have that word query. It's because I have a filter set up on my email so that all those queries go specially into a little folder. And then when I get to the point where I'm like, okay, I'm going to go through some queries right now and pass on some and maybe request some others, they're all there where I can look at them. If they pop up in the regular box or whatever, they might be filtered to spam. They might get lost as I'm looking through other stuff. I might be annoyed, wondering why you're trying to think outside the box in a situation where out of the box thinking this is not the time you should be thinking out of the box, right? So you're not trying to annoy me or anything. You're just trying to put some information ahead of me so that when I'm in the mindset to go look at queries at that moment, that your query is right there, and then I can look through fairly quickly and see if this is something that I'm interested in reading and looking at that time. If you satisfy the rest of those criteria, or it's something that I represent, is something I'm looking for at this time. The book doesn't seem like you're not telling me it's a 500,000 word novel where I'm gonna think that there's marketing problems. So I think I can sell it based on the general idea. Then the very next thing I'm going to do, well, I'm probably going to scroll past your synopsis, as I've mentioned elsewhere that that's not really my thing. And I'm going to go to your first page and I'm going to see how that looks me. So knowing that, then what is the most important thing that you can do in your query once you've put the packaging in the right order, once you've recognized, like playing a game of tennis, that you need a net and rackets and balls, and you've satisfied all those basics in order to then play the game as it's within the rules. Well, what you're trying to do is get me to read your opening pages with a little bit more attention. Attention is the most valuable commodity in this industry. It's the reason why people go to conferences. It's the reason why people attend pitch sessions. It's the reason why if you have requested material that you always want to remind someone. Is the reason why you're involved in any sort of networking or anything. You're trying to raise my level of attention above that is typical for all those other queries that I have. Some of those things are out of your control. I might be reading your query when I'm super slammed with other work and I'm looking for reasons to pass on things. That happens more and more over time as I get busier and busier, and I'm no longer necessarily looking to expand my list, that I'm really trying to maintain the level of work that I already have. So that's out of your hands. I might be not feeling great. I might be realizing I've been busy with other stuff and I have a big backlog of queries. That just happened to me. So I was trying to go through a couple hundred queries over a few days, and that is going to get you less attention than you otherwise would. But what you're trying to do with your query is to get me to read the opening sentences and page of your query with a little bit more attention than I otherwise would. So that's where that hooky part is in that center part. And I'm going to speak about that more at length at a different time. But so knowing that, there's some things that you should do. Your query needs to be somewhat confined in length, and everything should be able to fit on a page and not just a big wall of text either without any paragraph breaks or anything. You're not trying to squeeze as much in there. You're trying to be intriguing for me. So it doesn't mean you should not tell me anything that's superfluous, right? So I mentioned that your number one credential for being able to write a novel is to have written a good novel. It's wonderful if you can say that you're querying me after having been a bestseller, or that you are writing about a disaster on the International Space Station, and by the way, you're an astronaut, right? I mean, there are some sorts of things that are going to be more attractive to me than others. If you're writing a book set in a fantasy world of medieval Persia, for example, and you were born in Iran, but raised in the United States, having grown up knowing all of the American fantasy tropes, wow, that's a fantastic sort of thing to mention, right? That's the sort of thing that's going to hook me. I have a lot of personal interests. I like stuff set in other cultures, Latin America, things about my background that are going to be personally intriguing to me. If you know that and you can make a connection, great. But what you shouldn't do is give me little irrelevant biographical information. Maybe you want to say, I'm a writer living in Paris, if it's something interesting, but don't say I'm the parent of 3 fur babies and I've been wanting to be a writer since I was a teenager. That little thing where people say about myself and they have this then kind of clumsy, like they feel like they need to present themselves. I'll find that stuff out later. Like if I'm intrigued, I might even come right out and ask you, like, what's your background? Do you have any writing experience? Has this manuscript been seen by anyone? But don't waste your words, because when you're wasting your words, you're wasting my attention. And your best case scenario is that I just skim over that. If I skim over it, either way, I'm just looking at your book with a little bit less attention. So get right to the point. Something about such and such a 85,000 word book of women's fiction, where such an, and then you have a little paragraph where you just try to make your story sound as intriguing as possible. And then a little bit of a, whatever, briefly you can close that. But the briefer you can be without looking like, hi, my name is so-and-so and I've written a book, do you want to look at it, right? I mean, you still have to tell me the essentials. But the briefer, the more catchy, the more grabby you can be, the better. There are cases where people break a few of these rules and end up getting through anyway somehow. And if things are within my category, I always generally glance at the first page and keep reading until my attention wanes. But the reality is if you're kind of like picking up a book from your favorite writer, if you already go into it with some expectations that this book is going to be great, if it has a little bit of a sluggish start, you're just going to give that book a lot more patience, because you know that you're going to eventually like that book anyway. I don't know that, but if your query is polished and intriguing, I'm going to be just a little bit more focused on what you're trying to do on the page, and I'm not going to be like a distracted 10-year-old who's, trying to do multiple things at the same time, which unfortunately is the reality sometimes. Knowing all those things, then it might help you at the end to know to hopefully not take rejections from querying as personally as maybe you've taken them in the past. I know that's easy to say, but the reality is when an agent says, this is not right for me at this time, or, taking a look, you can't answer anything with any clarity about why that individual rejected it. In another video, I'm going to talk a little bit about how to try to draw some conclusions from having had multiple points of feedback. But for now, feedback from one person doesn't tell you anything. So don't take it personally, because most of the time it's not personal. If you present yourself in a polite and professional way, it's never going to be personal for me. Like, I'm never going to hold any of that against you in the future. I will not, with rare exceptions. I just don't even remember someone who's queried me in the past. So you can feel free to try again, and maybe you're in sync with me, with my work rhythm at that point, or with someone else's. If that happens, just approach it in a professional way and don't take it personally. And then don't try to reinvent the wheel. That's not your job.